Good evening, Coalition community. Welcome to another edition of the Coalition. My name is Edgar Palacios, founder of the Latinx Education Collaborative. I'm excited to be here with my partner in purpose. Is that right? Is that a good description for you, Cornell?
Look, I'll take crime.
All right, partner in crime too. Sometimes what we have to do is criminal. No, I'm just kidding,
Exactly.
Lieutenant Governor. I'm just kidding, Lieutenant Governor. We are so thrilled to have with us our special guest today, Alicia Kennedy, who is a candidate for Lieutenant Governor of the state of Missouri. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good. Good evening, Cole. See, I'm hearing my voice again. This is good. I love the sound of my voice, as everybody knows. I'm just kidding. Again, a lot of jokes tonight. So, Alicia, we're so thrilled to have you here. For those of us that don't know you, although I do think that a lot of us know you, will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. I am an attorney here in Kansas City, Missouri. Most recently, I served on the city council for the city of Kansas City and chaired the Neighborhoods and Public Safety Committee. Prior to going into public office, I served as an assistant prosecutor in Jackson County and led up our diversion programs and was lead for community justice, working with neighborhoods to proactively address violent crime, which is what led me to get involved in public office, because I quickly realized many of the issues we were trying to address about crime were symptomatic, and the root causes were education or lack thereof, substance abuse, mental health, limited economic opportunities for families in disadvantaged communities, and then just family dysfunction. And so those are not things normally the prosecutor's office would address. And I really wanted to get to the part of the matter and address the real issues. And so here I am now, 10 years later, running for Lieutenant Governor of the state of Missouri, because in this capacity, many of the issues I've learned really stem at the state level. So many times we were saying, we're preempted by the state of dealing with gun violence in Kansas City. We were dealing with funding issues when you relate to education, and that's at the state level. When you talk about economic opportunities, a lot of those are driven at the state level, whether it be unemployment, job training opportunities, and then affordable housing and stabilizing neighborhoods. Again, funding from the state and federal government. And so I became committed to moving upstream to work on these issues. And so after winning the primary election on August the 4th, with almost 75% of the vote statewide, yay, thank you for everybody that supported me. We are now facing another election on November the 4th. And I just want to introduce myself to some and reintroduce to others, and allow us to have a dialogue about how the Lieutenant Governor can support or advocate more effectively on the things you guys care about.
Yeah, thank you for that. I really appreciate you coming in and being with us and sharing time with us. I know that it's become such a poignant issue around Kamala Harris and being in the prosecution's office, right? Can you kind of speak to that just for a few minutes of kind of that juxtaposition, maybe, or like maybe some tension that you felt being in the prosecutor's office, but also knowing that you're working towards justice-led initiatives for the Black and Brown community?
Well, I'll start by saying that how I even found myself in that office was just kind of how fate would have it. My intention was to do community economic development, working at rebuilding communities by focused on real estate. And when I graduated from law school in 2010, the commercial real estate market was trash. And everyone said, well, there's no deals, go get some trial experience. And one of the best places to get trial experience is as a prosecutor or as a public defender. Just so have it, the elected prosecutor at the time was looking for diverse candidates. I was recruited, and she created a position for me and allowed me to work on executive staff because my commitment was about rebuilding communities. And so she created a position that allowed me to work closely with neighborhood groups to address violent crime, which is oftentimes one of the biggest impediments to economic development occurring. And so my role was very unique. I had a split role. I had a limited case docket that I carried of cases, which I prosecuted everything from minor drug possessions to trying multiple homicide cases with some attorneys that are now judges. So I had a very broad and a breadth of experience that gave me access to the community and a vantage point of the community that most people don't get to see. I saw people at their lowest. I saw them at their worst. I saw them at their most vulnerable. And I saw people who I worked with try to find ways to mitigate the damage of people who made a series of bad decisions. And so having the ability to create diversion programs and recommend second chance opportunities was very much worthwhile. But again, I realized a lot of that was still too little too late. So I think for anybody who's interested in justice, I would encourage them not to dismiss the prosecutor's office, because the prosecutor does more justice than any defense attorney would do any day. You decide who gets charged, what they get charged with, what kind of offer they're going to get, if they have to go to trial or not, how much time they're going to have to stay in jail, what their bond amount is going to be. So the prosecutor has a lot of authority over everyday lives of people who oftentimes in urban communities like Kansas City or in St. Louis are Black and brown. But guess what? The victims are also Black and brown that are looking for justice. And so it requires someone who is fair-minded, that has some real life experiences to be able to appreciate the risk and also make sure that the recommendation for punishment meets the crime and not just being overzealous in your prosecution. So I feel like it was great, a great training ground for me to go from growing up in zip code 64130, which was dubbed as the murder factory. Right. 64130, shout out. But people who come from where we come from don't make it to where we are oftentimes. Right. And so to have the position of privilege to weigh in and give input to some of these decision-making things, I think more of us need to do it. But we need to be informed in how we go about doing it. But again, I had my experience. I did it for about 4 years and knew that was not the end all be all. And while I did a lot of good in that office, it was time to move upstream because I could only help so many. But I knew that the culture in which we were raising children in these communities of color, 64130, 64128, I mean, you just look at the zip code and you can kind of point out and you know what kind of outcomes are going to come. But for us doing the work on the front end to change the environment, as many of you guys educators understand, you don't blame the fish, you check the environment. And getting involved in politics and policy was my way of being able to address the environment.
Alicia, thank you so much for that response. Yeah,
that was awesome. Thank you so much.
I was gonna welcome Katina and Cecilia into the space.
What's up, y'all?
Hey. Welcome everyone that has tuned in live. I'm sure that Edgar, our producer, has already done that. Thank you so much. Candidate Alissia Canady for joining us today. Cornell, thank you for fielding those questions. Cecilia, of course, we have missed being with you, so we are so glad to see you today. I want to actually follow up on the question that she just answered and say this, or ask this question. What role did you see as a prosecutor as it relates to education and many of those that were being prosecuted when you were in the prosecutor's office?
So this is the weirdest thing. So pardon my ignorance in this. So when I would handle the dockets, I had the general crimes docket over at Creme, 1315 Locust Building. So it's just kind of like, they call it the rocket docket. Everybody just kind of comes in. You got pretty much anything, shoplifting, some assault cases, some burglaries, tampering, just everything. And so many of the individuals would enter guilty pleas. Most of them were represented by public defenders. And part of the plea process, the judge would ask the defendant, what is your highest level of education completed? And most of them would say the 10th grade. And then after maybe 3 or 4 months, I'm like, why the 10th grade? Well, at the 10th grade, they're 16. And that's the age they're able to legally drop out of school. So what I quickly made the connection was with the graduation rates and those that were tied into the criminal justice system. Individuals without a high school diploma have a 70% increased chance of having negative interactions with law enforcement. And so that got me to kind of delving into the education aspect of criminal justice, because I did not necessarily, only thing I knew about education and criminal justice prior to that was that I'd heard that they were building jail cells based on 3rd grade reading levels. That was the only correlation I had ever heard previously until I got in the courtroom and saw those guilty pleas and those young men. And then the second thing, which really got me fired up and made me decide it was time to leave from just triaging as a prosecutor, trying to mitigate the harm to community and mitigate how much time you're going to get, to really focus on the front end. There was a young man who was murdered who was a Lincoln student, Lincoln Prep, which Lincoln Prep, if you're from Kansas City, you got to be pretty intelligent to even get into Lincoln and to stay in Lincoln. This young man named Trevor Gorms was murdered. he had broke into or allegedly he had broke into someone's house and was shot by the homeowner. Coming to find out, he was a student at Lincoln College Prep. And I'm like, what happened? What was the story? Coming to find out, he was an unaccompanied youth. His family was homeless. And hanging out with some people, bad decisions, kids dead. And I'm like, okay, how many more kids like Trevor Gorms are out there? What are we doing to address these unaccompanied youth? How are we putting a safety net in place to be able to make sure they are not making worse decisions out of bad situations? And so that work continues today as it relates to unaccompanied youth. And so that's what really kind of, as I start unthread that needle, I'm like, oh, we've got to do more. Who owns this problem? Who's supposed to be doing this? And, this person wants to do, but they don't have money. This group has money, but they don't have the connections in the community. But as a result, the people who need the help are kind of outside the safety net. And so that was my initial experience of education as it relates to criminal justice. And I still believe wholeheartedly that those who are properly educated and are aware of opportunities that are in stable families, couple that with it, or have caring adults that support them, are able to be successful even in dysfunctional environments.
So thank you for that answer. Now I want to actually kind of turn it to a different direction. So we know that people are being pushed out, they're dropping out when they reach the age of 16. I didn't even know when I was in school that at 16 I could legally drop out. I wonder often.
Tina, I know your mama.
No, that wasn't happening. But I'm wondering if and when do young people even get that information? But also, if we start addressing providing high quality education at early childhood level, and then supporting parents that are low income or may have struggled themselves when they are first thinking about having children, their early years, those early developmental years, if in fact we can stop the bleed, so to speak, we can stop or reduce significantly the dropout, the push out rates, and then we see less resulting people entering the criminal justice system. So as you run for lieutenant governor, one of the roles provided by the statute is that you have the opportunity to advise the Department of Education on issues surrounding early childhood. So what have you learned? I know we talked last week about this, but what have you learned about where we are as it relates to early childhood? How can we fund it? How can we increase quality seats? What needs to happen in terms of educators or education professionals being the ones that are pushing the policy in these areas, and we're not leaving it to business people, the philanthropic organizations, or those in corporate America. So if you can speak to that for those that are tuning in and listening, I'd love to hear that.
Can I add one quick thing? Could you also explain what the role of lieutenant governor is?
Okay.
Yeah.
So which one do you guys want first? Because
you can start with the role and then go right into a part of that role being advising the Department of Education in regards to early childhood and parents as teachers.
Yeah, let's back up a minute. I need some background. Give me some background first. Thank you, Ed.
Okay, so the lieutenant governor is a constitutional position as part of the executive office statewide. It's the number 2 in command, and similar to the vice president, the lieutenant governor serves in the event that the governor is not available, and by state constitution presides over the Senate, just like the vice president of the United States does as well. And so in a situation such as that, there are also statutory requirements for that position as well. And of those statutory requirements, you serve on boards and commissions that impact education, as Katina mentioned, as an advisor to Department of Education and parents as teachers in particular, early childhood parents as teachers, housing, as on the board at MHDC, Missouri Housing Development Corporation, which deals with housing policy statewide, and has previously administered LIHTC credits, low income housing tax credits, which provides affordable housing to many families around the state, seniors as well. And then as well as overseeing tourism, the chief advocate for seniors and veterans, having an impact on MDFB, which is public finance, large scale economic development projects around the state, and a number of other things that have fiscal notes attached to them. And I think that most people don't realize the impact that the position has, because oftentimes the lieutenant governor, for example, the one that's in place now, was appointed, not elected. So they don't really know who this person is, don't really know what's going on. So there's not the transparency or accessibility, but also not real clear on what actionable items are coming out of that. How is that person using their voice to improve education outcomes for early education? How are they using their voice to increase opportunities for low-income housing and affordable housing developments for seniors and working families? How are you using that position to leverage economic development projects in communities that need a spur of economic development, other than those that are giving large sums of money to your campaigns? Because those positions and those funding opportunities should have direct impact tied to them, and should have transparency so we can measure the impact that they're having.
So one thing I will say then, based on the description of the role of lieutenant governor, it really is an important position in our state and states across the country. Why is it that you think that people haven't been tuned in and understand or have been educated about the importance of the role? And then what can we do as a collective community to let people know that it is absolutely important? We should know who's serving in that capacity, and then call for not just accessibility to them, but accountability from them. And
Absolutely.
then going into the other part on education.
So to the point you asked about why aren't people more knowledgeable, most election cycles, people are told to go vote. They're not necessarily told who's on the ballot, what issues are on the ballot, what platforms these individuals represent. They're just told to go vote. So by and large, people will vote at the top of the ticket, president, vice president, and don't necessarily look down ballot. May vote down ballot, may not vote down ballot. If voting down ballot, that means voting below president and vice president. That means you voting for senators, governors, lieutenant governors, the statewide offices. So it's governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, attorney general, treasurer, those 5 statewide positions, as well as your state reps and your state senators, because those are the people who are going to impact what happens every day in your state. They determine who funds, what funding education is going to get, what funding your local law enforcement is going to get or not, what funding is going to go to funding your education programs, the percentage is going to go. Right now, we just saw this administration cut K through 12 education by $130 million, cut higher ed by $55 million. How do you make up for those cuts? As we're sending our children back to school and they're having to adjust to the changes dealing with technology and all these, there's costs associated with all these changes that are occurring, right? Now, you may argue there's cost savings because you don't have to pay for buses, but there is an opportunity cost. And so how are the school districts making up for that? And are they getting their fair share of return for communities that may have a digital divide that they have to overcome? And so those kind of things that we have to take into account that matter to us. Who are we electing that's going to represent those interests? And so when you say, why do people know who hold those positions? Because oftentimes those candidates don't have the big budgets like the presidential candidates. So you don't know their names commonly. You oftentimes have to seek that information out. And then oftentimes about the transparency and accountability. Well, if you're not necessarily there to do the will of the people, you don't want to make that public knowledge, do you? But if I'm able to restore the budget, 100 of the $130 million that was cut, I want that on the front page. When you're doing good, you want it to be known. When you're not, and you just go with the status quo, you want to stay behind the scenes and stay kind of anonymous, because people are anticipating, or they're counting on voters' ignorance, and we can't afford that this political cycle. And so I appreciate you asking, what can we do to improve that? I think what you and this group are doing right now are absolutely what needs to happen. Let's have the conversation about who wants this position, what do they represent, what's their track record. Let me see your receipts. What have you been doing? Don't just promise me you're going to do this stuff. What have you been doing in your career to indicate to me you're really going to do this work? And then are you going to be accessible to us going down the line? Because there are going to be issues that come up for you in the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and you're going to need an advocate in Jefferson City. And you need to know the person who has some influence on that is going to be responsive to your needs, or at least your calls.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Go ahead, Cecilia.
Thank you, City Councilwoman Kennedy, for being here with us. We appreciate you and always being willing to share out things that are going on. Thank you for talking about down ballot, the importance of down ballot voting. I think many people don't recognize that and recognize that really most of what happens that affects our daily lives as Missourians happen in Jeff City, as opposed to what happens from our presidential and our vice presidential candidates. So thank you for sharing that. Also, can you talked about how we need to know who our state elected officials are. How can we make sure that our state elected officials in Missouri that are in Jeff City, while the times that they are there, also are present here in our community so people can understand the importance? I know some people do town halls and things of that nature, but I'm wondering what kind of political education do you foresee you as the next lieutenant governor of the state of Missouri doing to make sure that folks understand the importance of state government and how that works?
Well, again, having these conversations. So there's an electorate that is informed and engaged, and they vote. Oftentimes they vote along party lines, regardless of who's running. You win the primary, we're going to vote for that candidate, right? And that's just kind of how things have gone. That doesn't necessarily move the needle as regards to equity. That doesn't necessarily move the needle in regards to being innovative and creating opportunities. And so I think it's important for us to have this dialogue, these community conversations around where are the missed opportunities. We know what the laws are, we know the budget limitations, but who is willing to go outside the lines and say, this is something that needs to happen, and we're going to cobble together some resources to bring some attention to this focus area. We may not get in the budget right now, but we can at least put together the business case for the next cycle and work a long game to be able to accomplish some of these things. To your point of saying, how do we educate? What I found is that people that are like people that I grew up with who weren't politically astute or politically aligned were just concerned about their day to day, and oftentimes didn't feel empowered that they had the ability to change it. I think it's important for us to have that conversation about how empowering your vote is, about how empowering it is for you to be informed when you vote, how empowering it is for your voice to be heard in these public hearings, and how empowering it is for you to create accountability when your needs are not being met by those who are elected to serve them. And so that is the conversation I'm having as we go forward. Now, right now, the focus is obviously getting people to show up on November the 3rd. We got a critical election with the presidential. At the state level, we're seeing how leadership has not been effective in a lot of ways and how people are being impacted by it. And so now I'm just having conversations with people that are like, listen, I know you're not happy with the way things have gone, regardless of your party affiliation. And I get it. I'm not happy with it all either. But I am willing to do something. And so maybe I don't like the candidate for these offices, but here are a dozen other offices that are on the ballot that you can support. So go support what matters to you right now while we continue to work on those other things as well. Because we can't solve all the problems right now. We're seeing that right now with the Bernie people trying to reconcile with Biden's people. Listen, we got work to do, right? And the time is not up. We're going to continue to do the work. But there is a common enemy, and that common enemy right now is voter apathy. That's our common enemy. It's not one political person in office, while it may seem that way sometimes, it's voter apathy. Because if we all show up and vote our interests of change and people who are willing to work for change, we will see change. And that's a conversation we've got to have collectively.
I do have a question. You talk about voter apathy. I'm also concerned with like voter suppression. Can you talk a little bit about mailing ballots in? What does that look like? What does that process look like? How, if we're not able to show up to the polls, are there opportunities for us to continue to have our voices heard in that space?
Well, I believe that, Congress is working to try to create some accountability with the Postmaster General. He's saying he's not going to rock the boat right now. He'll wait till after the election. So thank you for all those that showed up to protest and sent letters and tweets and otherwise to express your disdain for the changes they were going to be making, that were going to have a disparate impact on people who just weren't going to be able to make it to the polls. I think we have to continue to be very vigilant in our advocacy around that, because the most important right you have, other than life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, is your right to vote. And so you have to protect that at all costs, because this is not a dictatorship, and we don't support tyranny. And so we want to make sure that we are able to exercise, as we should in a democracy, to be able to vote in and vote out those who we support or don't support. But I think as relates to mailing in ballots, that is one option. There's another option available. You can walk in and vote absentee at your local election authority in advance. In Missouri, that starts on September 22nd. So if you don't trust the mail, you have concerns about it, if you're going to cut it too close, walk in and vote absentee in advance. I'm encouraging everyone to consider that option, because they're doing a really good job of social distancing and making sure your vote is being counted. But if you don't have the ability to go physically vote absentee in person, request your ballot now and send it back early, because they're anticipating the return time is going to be about 10 days, and your ballot has to be received by 7 p.m. on November 3rd for it to count.
Thank you for that information. That's definitely needed. So those of you that are listening, you encourage, the people in your immediate circle, your touch points, to make sure that they check their registration now, that they actually either walk in when the opportunity presents itself, or mail in their ballots as early as possible, or go. Like some people, that is ritual. That's something they're accustomed to. They like that process and that feeling to know that they've gone in on election day. But it only works if we show up and show out. Take the necessary steps to protect yourself. We are still social distancing. We're still wearing masks. We need hand sanitizer. All of those things that are needed and necessary to make sure that you are counted. Because as we've said already, this is a very pivotal time in history, in our state, in our country. And we have to think for ourselves, educate ourselves, and actually complete the entire ballot. So that being said, for those of you that don't know or just tuning in, this is Monday night or Monday evening with the Coalition. The Coalition is made up of several organizations, being the Latinx Education Collaborative, Elements of Education Kansas City, the Block, Brothers Liberating Our Communities, Just Systems, the GRIOT, Teaching Like Me. Oh my gosh, am I leaving anybody out? I don't think so. Those are the organizations that make up the Coalition. Each and every one of our organizations is geared toward supporting educators and education professionals of color and the students that they teach. So that is why we get together to discuss pertinent issues that relate to education. And today our guest with us, if you don't see it on the screen, if you don't know who she is already, she is the candidate for Missouri Lieutenant Governor, Alissia Canady, formerly City Councilwoman, mayoral candidate, assistant prosecuting attorney, I believe, is that the way we say it? And just a community advocate, a person that has been a part of the Kansas City community for most of her life. So because we address issues relating to education, and Alicia has already stated that by statute, a part of the role of the lieutenant governor would be to advise on early childhood, I'm going to say Head Start as well, and parents as teachers. So let's zero in on that. We know that in the state of Missouri, we do not have enough quality seats to serve the children, usually black, brown, or poor, that need early childhood exposure and experience the most. It's severely unfunded. Those that are teachers or education professionals have done it from experience, not necessarily been formally trained. And that doesn't mean that they do a poor job, but we know that any of us in our professional lives, in order to remain relevant and do the best work, that we have to have those opportunities to do professional development afforded to us. That has not been happening. We've had failed measures in the state of Missouri, specifically here in Kansas City, with Mayor Sly James, pre-K tax. So as you've learned, again, Alicia, what would be the things that you would advise? What are you looking to address? What do you want to learn from those of us that are in the profession to impact our most vulnerable, and that is our early childhood students, and then, of course, the families?
Mm-hmm. So I think, one of the things that we have to be cognizant of is that how are we going to improve overall outcomes for our communities, whether it's urban, suburban, or rural. Our children, that's our investment, our human capital. I think we have to be very intentional about how we're approaching funding and our program delivery in those areas. You know, one of the challenges that we've seen oftentimes is that our kids, when they go to school, they're not ready. They're not kindergarten ready. Well, if that's the scenario, what are we going to be doing long term to mitigate that? There have been a number of efforts that have attempted to try to do that, create a universal pre-K. Some school districts have made the investment on their own. Some parents are making the investment on their own. But when you talk about adding quality seats, we have to have a systematic approach about how we are setting the standard of what quality looks like, and making sure there are resources available across the board to all modes of providing early childhood education, whether it's home-based, center-based, or private, that have access to the resources to meet the standards, because ultimately that child, it's in the public interest to make sure they're ready, because we've seen how difficult it is for them to catch up. And so we have to figure out what that's going to be, how we're going to format that, and how we're going to fund that equitably to make sure that we're getting the outcomes regardless of where that child starts out.
Thank you for that. And do you know why? I feel like we do a lot of talk. We do a lot of talk as education professionals. We do a lot of talk as community and neighborhoods. We do a lot of talk in Jeff City as elected officials. But what has really prevented us from making early childhood education, from your perspective, a priority in our state and in our country?
I can't speak for the state just yet. I can say that in my time serving in public office and in the public sphere that has had parallels with education, that we are now having an honest conversation about the need for us doing something different. And I think that's the start of it. Now we're trying to figure out what is the mode, right? We know what needs to happen. We're just trying to figure out the how. And part of the how is who's going to decide what this is going to look like, what the architecture of this is going to look like, who are going to be the decision makers in that. That's kind of where things kind of get lost, right? And who's going to run the show, and then who's going to pay for it. Because oftentimes who pays for it decides who has a say in the process. So we're trying to figure out right now here locally, what does that look like equitably? But I think the conversation really needs to be had at the state level as far as how are we going to support locally? Because in every jurisdiction and every school district, the needs are different. You know, you have some agricultural communities where their needs are very different than what they are in Kansas City and St. Louis. You have some niches, some uniqueness of demographics in Kansas City that are very unique, that don't apply to all parts of Kansas City. Some schools just kind of have this little, they just kind of got this culture where this is kind of the thing in that community. And so how are we best supporting the needs of families? And I think that's where we've got to answer the question. You ask, why do I think it's not a priority? It's not sexy. It's just not sexy. People don't campaign on early childhood education unless they're running for school board. People don't really talk about it. But it's such an important issue that it's the responsibility of the lieutenant governor to advise on it.
Let me chime in right here. Could it be also that the people that have the least access look like you and me? So therefore, it's not only is it not sexy, it doesn't matter, because the kids that are not being afforded the opportunity, the families that need it most, are Black, brown, and poor. And we talk like this on this format. So we get down and dirty with it.
Yeah. And I also think, Alissia, and Katina and Edgar, if we're going to be honest, there's an aspect of our profession too, of educators and people who are educator advocates, that we don't recognize how we need to do a pedagogy shift around early childhood education, right? I have been in spaces with elementary school teachers, middle school teachers, and high school teachers who chuck about early childhood professionals.
Yes.
When we are now recognizing that is one of the most important skill sets that we need to have. And it used to be one that was relegated to mothers who were at home, mothers who were able to do certain things, grandmothers. And so it, even more so than traditional education, I think, and traditional teachers, has a cast and a stigma to it, because, we tend to drop them off at Big Mama's house, and we don't recognize the skill set that Big Mama and others have had around really educating our young people, from infancy until preschool, kindergarten age. So
Yeah, I agree with that. And the significance of just verbal cues, right? So the fact that they were being dropped off at Big Mama's house, well, Big Mama was talking to them, that playing with them, singing songs, doing pickaboo, um, you know, patty cake, all of those things. And so we had the verbal cues that we needed that we weren't entering kindergarten behind.
right.
We talk about the word gap and all of those things. Well, that comes because now technology babysits, or we put them in a crib or a bassinet and we forget that they're there, or we put them in that car seat. Nobody is talking to each other. So those are the things now that early childhood professionals are doing. And you're right, Cecilia, they've been undervalued for a very long time, and they're often made fun of. Oh, they don't have no degree. Oh, they ain't nothing but a babysitter. All of those types of things. And so, from the local level to the profession to the state, we have to change the way in which early childhood providers are viewed.
Yes.
But we
have to make sure that we are doing the things that we need to do at our city, county, and state level to make sure that those educational professionals are compensated in the same ways that K through 12 professionals are compensated, and they're not. And so if they're not, then what would be someone's incentive to go into that unless they just had a love and a passion, right? As many of us do. We know that all educators don't make what they should make,
right.
but that the compensation should happen with early childhood professionals as well. And the opportunity for professional development and growth.
And you then throw in the gender issue and how men are actually ostracized for teaching in early childhood or early elementary because it's not manly for them to do that. And then because there's such low numbers of men in the profession as a whole, then we want to speed them through the process. And then next thing you know, they're a principal, they're associate superintendent, they're a superintendent, but we
After
still
2 years.
Right. That's a whole nother conversation. We need them. So bouncing back to
I do have a question. I want to ask Alicia, how will you fix all of that during your tenure as lieutenant governor? Is that an unreasonable expectation of you?
High charge.
She just needs to fix it. I mean, like, what? That ain't too much to ask, Edgar.
Well, I would say how I would address it. I can speak to that specifically. I think we have to have these open dialogues and candid dialogues about what's not working. And Cecilia mentioned a very important thing, which is pedagogy. We're talking about education at the state level. At the micro level, we're talking about pedagogy because we know our children, Black and brown children, learn sometimes differently. And what are the modes and means of educating our children? And when we say what quality is, does it take into account the ways that our children have historically learned? And I think that oftentimes that part is missing in how we're educating our children. I think that there has to be, and I'm not one for creating task force, but I think there has to be a table, a platform for these stakeholders such as you all that have formed under this collective to be able to weigh in. Because the people who are closest to the problem are the best ones to provide the solutions. So I can get to Jeff City and I'm talking to people all around the state who got a lot of great ideas, but they don't know how to educate kids in Kansas City, or like the Latinx does, or like Katina has, who's been in urban ed for a number of years, or Cecilia has, who's dealt with D&I issues in urban districts. So I think you got to have the right people a part of that conversation. That's my commitment to moving this forward as it relates to early childhood education. Because as an advisor, I need to be properly informed, number one. And I appreciate consultants, right? They have their value. But there are a number of people who are great consultants that are not paid as consultants. That should be, but their voice absolutely needs to be part of the conversation. And so I think that is part of where the shift has to occur. And so you mentioned about not having accessibility because of, they look like us. Well, it's some poor whites that are having the same conversation. And they may or may not realize the impact that it has on their child yet, because people may not be having these conversations in their communities and doing the work that the coalition is doing right here. But the effect is still the same when they go in the workforce. And so it is a problem. And we have to invest in human capital, starting in early education, period. We want to talk about the economic recovery of the state of Missouri. It starts with making sure we invest in the human capital. It starts with making sure that our kids are off to a good start being healthy, by living in safe communities and have access to quality education. Those are the fundamental building blocks of success. Then next, you got to stabilize families. But all these things have to work together and not be done in silos, because as I look at right now, we have a lot of agencies that do a lot of important work, but they're not all collaboratively working in a way that strengthens families. And so we've got to shift that mindset.
And what a lot of people don't know is that our state had an opportunity just recently. I'm sorry, Cecilia, I got you in a minute.
I'm gonna get in there after you, okay?
You know how we sticking more, girl.
I'm gonna jump in front of all of you and say so.
So recently,
I want to raise my hand
with COVID happening and the funding coming down from the federal level to the states had an opportunity to seek grant funding that would have then been put directly into the hands of families to choose how they would educate their children this school year. And it didn't have to all be technology. They could choose from a plethora. Our governor, and I'm assuming our lieutenant governor, did not seek that grant. So therefore, tons of families across the state of Missouri do not have access to additional funding to actually make a choice about how they educate their children. Do we need to be looking, thinking, investigating things outside the box? And how do you see that as a candidate happening in the state of Missouri when so many of us have been conditioned to do it the way we've always done it?
And before you speak on that, Alicia, can I also talk about probably the strategy of not applying for that? Because over 75% of Missouri's budget is from federal grants and programming. So we are not ones who are opposed to applying for those things. We do strategically decide what we want to apply for, because then it's easy to say, well, we got to cut this educational budget, because if y'all want Medicaid, then we got to cut this. If you want this, then we have to cut this, as opposed to doing what's right for Missouri citizens. Sorry, Alicia, go ahead.
Don't be sorry. That's good information.
Yeah. When I was doing research, when working on Yes on 2, over 75% of our current Missouri budget comes from federal contributions. So it is not that we're opposed to that. We're opposed to things that we believe are social safety nets for people who need them, for poor rural folks, for black and brown folks in urban core and in rural Missouri, right? And for poor people all over. And I think that it's very important that we talk about that. And I'm glad that you're making this connection, Alicia, because people don't recognize that rural folks and urban folks, 99.9% of their issues are the same. They all want access to good employment. They want access to education for their children. They want affordable housing. They want all of the things that they want good health care, right? All of these things that are the same, that people that are their enemies, their mutual enemies, that don't necessarily always look like their enemies, are giving them information that pits them against one another to be divisive. So then we can't hold the true people accountable that we need to hold accountable.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. So thank you for your work on Yes on 2. That was, a quick work, literally, when the governor moved it up to the August ballot. But a lot of heavy lifting went into that, and it was successful. But that's an example of how we had to go through the initiative petition process to get what was right on behalf of residents of Missouri. Over 100,000 kids were kicked off the rolls for Medicaid, and we had to fight. We had to fight through all the political mishmashing and the political rhetoric to get what was right and fair to Missouri residents. That's crazy.
It's crazy. And they'll be attacking it again. Just like they attack Clean Missouri and all that, right? Yeah.
But the tactic has to be for us to show up in November. because we've seen that this administration will totally try to undermine the will of the voters time and time again, and not do what's right for political gain. These are not partisan issues we're talking about. Healthcare, children, properly funding early childhood education for our children. These aren't partisan issues. And I'll tell you right now, we're not talking about poor people who just sit on their butts not doing nothing. We're talking about people who are working, making $12 an hour, $14 an hour, $15 an hour. But I'm saying $15, but they got 2 and 3 kids. And so they're the working poor. And so they can't afford private school, but they're paying taxes. They're being good parents, and they want a good future for their children. We owe that to them as taxpayers in Missouri. And so I don't care what your political affiliation is. If you can't get behind that, you don't deserve to serve in public office, period. Full stop. And so we have to have these conversations come election day, because I talk to my peers, and I'm a lawyer. Half of the lawyers I know are not Democrat, and half of them don't live in Missouri. But those that do live in Missouri, and regardless if they're Democrat or not, do you support giving children a fair chance from the beginning? Because we know what you're going to do when they get grown, they don't do right. But are you willing to give them a fair chance in the beginning to get to see if the outcome is going to be different? You're proud of me and you're glad to say you know me, but I was one of those children. So would you have given me a chance? You know, so I have to break the conversation down that granular to say,
yes.
Listen, I was that child. My mom was a teen parent. She had 3 kids by the time she was 22 and never made more than probably $30,000 a year when I was growing up, if that, you know? And so in that situation, but for me having quality educators, because when I graduated from KCPS, it was still accredited, but I had quality educators that even though my mom had never went to college, they helped develop me. And before mentors were popular, your teachers were your mentors, right? And so we've got to begin to shift and have this dialogue about creating accountability of those stakeholders in the space that have knowledge, and the stakeholders are those that are the end users, i.e. the parents. And so how are we making sure they are informed, making sure they are engaged to have agency on the outcomes for their children? Because I want to point all the elected officials all day, but if we keep sending them back, they're going to keep doing what they're doing. We've got to change that.
And then not only, you know, parents have an opportunity to advocate, they, you know, when you talk about that table and who is sitting at that table, I think that as an elected official, along with other people in the state, you have an opportunity to place people at that table. And far too often we see the same people sitting at the tables, but the conditions are not changing. They're not improving. So how do you propose getting those that haven't been at the table, those parents, those people like Cecilia or Edgar or myself or whomever you deem, you engaged with Sharnissa last week, Holiday Sky. I mean, like we talked about it. You know, those are the people, these are the people that haven't been afforded the opportunity. But we absolutely have the capability, the capacity, the bandwidth, the knowledge, the experience. How do we get to the table?
So one, there's a guy who I listen to on radio. I can't call his name right now, but he has a saying. He said, you got to put it where the goats can get it. I know that may sound offensive. That's the old country saying, but you got to put it where the goats can get it. Meaning bring it down to the very basic level. People can understand what's happening and understand and empower them and help them understand their agency in this process. So many people I talk to, they're like, Alicia, I'm behind you. I know you're going to do what you say you're going to do. But the rest of these folks, I don't know. So they will literally go and vote and check the box for me and leave everybody else blank because they don't have confidence in the political process or the candidates that seek it. Well, I came through the grassroots. I told you I grew up in 64130. My mom was a teen parent. I graduated from KCPS. I didn't have a silver spoon. I didn't go to Ivy League, but I have a strong conviction for building community. I thought I was going to build houses. God had a different plan. And so now I'm using the skills, the relationships, and the resources he's given me to be able to advocate and include others and say, listen, I did it. You can do it too. Here's how you can plug in. I have people who are doing what you guys are doing right now, which is extremely important. I got folks that are protesting. I got folks that are letter writing, sending postcards, who are engaging voters. I mean, it's at so many different levels. You can plug in where you can. I know parents that are working 2 full-time jobs right now and don't have time to do what we're doing right now. But guess what? They're going to come back and watch this video after it's over because they got some downtime later. Guess where they're going to be? On social media. I'm going to say, hey, watch this feed. You're going to learn something. They'll spend 30 minutes watching a video to become enlightened from people who they know and trust. This is why I'm on this platform and not on Fox News, because the people on Fox News already have a political bent. We have an opportunity to educate, to engage, inform, and educate. And we've got to do that with purpose. And so that's why I appreciate the platform you guys have created, because you are enlightening so many people each and every week with this dialogue. But even after the election, we have to continue the conversation, because when you ask how do we get other people involved, we have to make sure they got to see the small wins. You've done organizing. Cecilia's, everybody on this call has done organizing. People need to see those small victories of how their collective voice matters. Whether it's small dollar donations, we need to raise $1,000, chip in $5, and then in 24 hours we got $3,000. They're like, man, my $5 really matter. Now, if I have a call to action for you to show up for something, you just one person, hey, share this with 10 friends. Now we have collective impact. People need to see the examples of what collective impact looks like. Then they can appreciate the power. I posted the other day about how the Black vote is viewed as kind of like vibranium now. If you guys have seen the movie Black Panther, vibranium was a currency in Wakanda. Vibranium is it's worth more than any precious metal we know in America. But that's how powerful the Black vote is now. I don't know that all Black folks and brown folks realize how powerful that vote is. It's the value of like vibranium right now. And people are going to pander it. And I just ask that you don't squander it. I don't care if you don't vote for a Democrat. I don't care if you don't vote for a Republican. I care that you are informed about what's on the ballot and you go vote for what matters to you. If it's education, healthcare, find a candidate that represents those interests and you vote for that. Because I want you to at least plug into this process until we can see change. But if you don't show up and vote and they say, oh, these people don't vote anyway, that's what they tell me. Most issues that I've advocated on, I'm an advocate for disadvantaged communities, whatever color they are. I'm going to speak up for the voiceless. And what they tell me, these people don't vote. Alicia, why are you risking your political capital for people who don't vote? I said, because of this attitude is why they don't vote. You're not listening to them. So why are they going to show up and vote for you again?
And go ahead, Alicia. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, and I think this is by design. So as you move into the lieutenant governorship of Missouri and you are interfacing with DESE and really instrumental in those spaces, please know that for about the last 15 years, civics has not been a course that is taught in our schools, in urban spaces and in rural spaces. I'm sure they're still in some private schools. I'm sure that they're still in some schools who are highly funded, but it no longer is in urban and rural spaces where you have to have your 8th grade year of civics so you know how the process works. Most people don't know even how our process works. And so we have to figure out a way for DESE to, I believe, reinstate that as something that does need for people to have, at least by the time they're in 12th grade, right? So that in order to graduate, that they have a full year of civics, because then they would become more engaged around our elected offices. And you can see the decline in our voting because I believe it's a voter suppression issue in many, many ways. I believe that is an intentional way of ensuring that not everyone has equal knowledge about how our systems of justice work. Right. And so if we are looking at how our government works for the most part, so if we are looking at these types of things, then to me, it's not an accident that people are voting at the levels that they are voting right now. Yes, it is because they don't feel heard. Also, it's because they don't understand the system.
Well,
Yeah, we just got a comment also. Laura says, yes, we should all learn about the political process and its power. It makes a difference for sure. And that's, I don't even remember when it, left the schools. I know I had it for sure. But here's the thing, that doesn't always have to be a DESE requirement. We can look at our district officials, our school board officials, our superintendents. They have some leeway. And so if parents, educators in the larger community want to put pressure on them in regards to curriculum, then that's where we can show up, and that's where we can put enough pressure to have some of the small wins that Alicia is talking about while we work to change things at the state level as well.
Yeah, as a history and an English teacher, I would make it a part of my curriculum, but I chose to do that. Everyone did not choose to do that, right? As a middle school and high school teacher, and I'm recognizing, people don't know their states, they don't know geography, they don't know capitals,
Right.
they don't even know what the capital is. So then I need to make this a part of my curriculum as a humanities teacher. But people did not do that and don't do that because we tend to do what we are demanded to do, not what we should do.
But that's a whole other issue.
I was just going to quickly say, I want to be respectful of your time. I know we are at 6 o'clock, and so you're welcome to stay with us a little bit longer and continue to discuss, but I also want to create the space. I know you're incredibly busy right now, so I want to make sure that you have the opportunity to exit if you need to.
Okay, and I do need to transition, but I've enjoyed this conversation. I hope that we can do a part 2 at some point in the future. But I will say this. I'll go back to agency because I'm all about accountability of those who want to serve the public. 100%. You want to serve the public, serve them wholeheartedly with transparency. But I will also add in this conversation the role of agency of those who are the end users. And I think that's a conversation we've got to start having is what is the agency that these parents have for their children? What is the agency that the seniors in our community who vote all the time that may not have kids in schools anymore, so they're not vested in the same way because their kids are grown and gone, but their kids coming behind, your nieces, nephews, grandkids, that still need your vision, your insight, your advocacy to be present. Because some of these young parents just don't have the capacity to do it right now. They're working 2 full-time jobs, raising kids in the midst of COVID. One of my good friends has a good job working for Blue Cross, has 2 kids under the age of 12 at home, been home since March, almost 6 months. Everybody going crazy. And so to ask them to get involved, we were talking about Black Lives Matter. And she said, listen, I care about Black lives, but I'm just trying to maintain the Black lives in my house right now. So I don't have time to go to a protest because I'm not trying to expose my kids to COVID. But how can I get involved in doing some of this work you guys are talking about in the midst of all that I've got going on? So I'll say this and kind of put a bow on what I'm saying. I grew up on the east side of Kansas City in the Vineyard neighborhood, 64130 zip code, graduate from Kansas City Public Schools. I grew up with a single mom who was a teen parent and did the best she could to provide for us. I had a strong family network around me, my grandparents and cousins that were like brothers and sisters. I mean, it was a typical family. It was an ideal family environment, right? You grew up Black, and otherwise poor, right? But I left and went to law school, and of all places in Vermilion, South Dakota, rural America, the least diverse state in the country. God has a plan in the midst of it all. So people say, well, Alicia, you from the hood. What you know about rural America? I lived it for 3 years. I lived in rural America, right? And it was at that point when I realized I was raised in a functioning dysfunction. Everybody didn't grow up the way I grew up. Everybody's education level was not the same. I was not prepared for law school when I got there. I wasn't. And I was not, and so I wasn't equally footed to be competitive. But I had some other advantages. I had street smarts and I knew how to be effective in advocacy and argue. I've been arguing all my life, right? That's why I became a lawyer. So there were some strengths that I did have, but I also realized where the weaknesses were in the fabric of our society. And so that's what kind of birthed the passion for me to come back and get back and work on some of these things, because it took me going somewhere different, seeing something different to say, this is not right. And we want better outcomes for our kids, regardless of what they look like. Even if they don't have shared experiences, we want them to have equal footing to have good opportunities. And we owe it to our kids to do that. So that's my challenge to anyone who wants to serve publicly or that currently holds public. I don't care what letters behind your name of your political affiliation. I don't care what color your skin is. Our children deserve a fair shot, and we have an obligation to give them that. And we have to put our political agendas aside and be committed to doing that work. Katina, you said something, I wrote it down. I'm going to use it again. Work on what we can agree on. That hit home for me, because that is the issue with politics right now. Everybody want to argue. We can always find something to argue about, but let's work on what we got work to do. Like my friend Nicole Price, we got work to do. And let's work on what we can agree on so that we can improve the impacts and outcomes of our children. Then we'll see a reduction in violence. Then we'll see, better opportunities from down the line. But it starts with these conversations, and I'm happy to be a part of them. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Belated happy birthday. I know you just celebrated a birthday. I did as well. This summer month, I tell you, it's been great people. Great people. celebrating another lap around the sun. So we wish you all the best in your candidacy. I support your candidacy. I can say that not as a member of the coalition, but just Katina Taylor. I've learned a lot watching you navigate the political scene, not just here in Kansas City, but now on the state level. I also wanted to point out one of our viewers is saying, thank you for the dialogue. They are a social worker by profession and a strong advocate for education and building healthy communities. They are asking us to do another session. So we will have to carve out time to do that. Next week, we are working, hopefully, prayerfully, on getting the young lady that might be your counterpart. And I think that would be historic in the state of Missouri to have two women serving as governor and lieutenant governor, if in fact this happens, if we in fact get out to vote, leading our state. We've given me an opportunity to do it and do it well. And yeah, I'm just gonna be me, and they ain't did it. So now it is something different.
Yeah, exactly. But thank you guys for all the important work you guys are doing collectively in this coalition. Bringing diverse communities, bringing them information, and you guys are doing the work, not just talking the talk. That's something I want to give them a round of applause for doing the work, the hard work. So Edgar, Cecilia, Katina, and all those that were not present today, thank you from the bottom of my heart. And don't let up. Yeah, we'll continue to work together. Absolutely. But thank you guys.
To have you and Nicole on November 3rd.
Okay.
The day before the election.
Oh,
the election is the 3rd. So the election is
November
2nd.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, early voting. Somebody asked earlier about, voter suppression, whatever. Vote early. Now, COVID is real, and that is an opportunity for you to go vote absentee in person. You can go as early as September 22nd. If you cannot go in person to your election authority, go ahead and ask for your mail-in ballot early so you can get it back on time. So thank you guys for listening. And, you can follow me on my website at Canady for Missouri. That's CANADY Missouri spelled out.com, or follow me on Facebook at Canady for Missouri. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. You can go. We're going to stay for a quick wrap up, I think. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Tell the people sorry for keeping you late. All right. So what do we think of our conversation today? What do we think? Comments, last thoughts before we sign off? It's 6:06. We've been going long, so we may as well not break with tradition.
I'm trying to talk, but my puppy's also trying to bark. So I'm trying.
Can we see the puppy?
Right. Let's see the puppy.
I'm like, leave me alone. Let me get finished with this. Then we can go outside. I think this is wonderful. I'm going to post something tomorrow. I talk about it because, people have asked me why am I so political as an educator, and why as a political person am I so involved in education? And I have said, as long as politics are in political people are in education, educators should be in politics, right?
Come on, you better say that. Say that again. Say it again.
All of that. As long as politicians are knee deep in education, educators should be knee deep in politics, because we have to hold our elected officials accountable. We have to make sure that they are doing what is right for the folks who got them there, and we have to make sure that they are providing the resources and advancing the policy that is going to help the least of these, which oftentimes are children.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm glad that you said that, because oftentimes education professionals, so I'm not just talking about those in the four walls of the classroom, but I'm saying anybody that touches education, oftentimes they think that's the end all, the be all, the end all, right? So they look for this linear path. Oh, I'm going to be a paraprofessional, then I'm going to become an educator, and then I'm become a vice principal or an instructional coach, and then I'm become a principal and a superintendent. But what they fail to realize, and what we have to do, is start spreading our wings to go into areas that we may not have considered before. Because these people, these elected officials, these politicians, these people that sit on boards and commissions across the state, they are the ones that make decisions that impact the work we do each and every day. So you cannot afford not to be engaged, and it's your civic responsibility. So don't tell me, oh, I ain't got nothing to do with that. When those are the people setting your salary, and those are the people that's impacting what you teach, and the standardized testing and the school day that you complain about, and our access to social workers and OT and PT and all these folks, don't tell me that you do not have a responsibility to engage. You do.
And we just need to be honest about it, y'all. Like, I know that people don't like to hear, oh, because I talk about those shoulders upon which we stand, right? I very rarely do, not very rare, I never do a facilitation of a training. When I was in the classroom, I brought my mother and my grandmother, who are the best educators I have ever known, in the classroom with me. I do it the same thing now in consulting and facilitating. And, you know, we are standing upon shoulders on people who had to guess the number of marbles in a jar. And that wasn't in 1940, 1920, 1910. That was in 1960, before right before the Voting Rights Act was passed, right? And so we just lost someone who walked across the bridge and got beaten so that we could vote. And so we have to stop pretending like that we do not have a responsibility for the shoulders upon which we stand, and recognize that if it were not for them, we could not be who we are today. And so, you know, we just have to figure out a way, and we have to figure out a way to stop being so privileged and entitled around, well, if it's not my issue, then I'm not going to vote. 99% of the time when I vote, it is not about my issue. It is because it is my civic duty, it's my right and responsibility, and it's my privilege as an American citizen to do so. And because my mom and my grandmama told me to. How about that? Sometimes we just need to do that because they told us to.
And if you think it ain't your issue, think again. Because anything has the potential to impact you. And it does, whether you acknowledge it or see it or you don't. So let's be real clear about that. Laura says, Cecilia, we do need more educators involved in politics. Politics guides the money. Miss Brown, thank you for tuning in. She says, politics dictate the educational system. This is why this is a way we have to advocate for our children. Absolutely. So every Monday, the coalition is here, 5:00 p.m. We may be adjusting our time soon. I'm seeing that our viewership is not where it used to be. I wonder if that's because people are returning to school, you know, changing their schedules. But we want to make sure that we're engaging with as many of you as possible, hearing your voices, giving you an opportunity to ask questions of us and our guests. So we'll discuss that and we'll let you guys know. But thank you for tuning in. As usual, Edgar, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't just honor and call into this space Jacob Blake and everything that's going on in Kenosha, Wisconsin at the moment. So,
a father of four, and from what is said, a very active and present father of four.
What I would say along those lines, of course, calling him into the space, but also calling us into the space and holding us accountable of how we impact one another when we share out. And I understand the need for videoing some of these incidents and things of that nature, but understand that we have the potential to overwhelm ourselves, to suffer from battle fatigue, to go into depression, to really negatively impact ourselves the more we share these videos of shootings and things like that. Ourselves and our children are impacted. So while we honor the life that was so tragically taken in the community that has been greatly impacted, be cautious, be mindful of how you are sharing that across social media platforms and things like that, and even how you're taking it into your own spirit. So thank you, Edgar, for calling that to our attention. We appreciate you for doing that. And of course, our heartfelt prayers, condolences, light and love go out to the city, that family. It's just, I don't know what else to say when we keep having to have these conversations. So that said, it's 6:13. I'm gonna let you guys get on with the rest of your evening. I actually have something else later. Go take the doggy out. Glad to see your beautiful face. Looking
Y'all heard it here first. Katina has plans tonight, and so she is dismissing us so she can go on with those plans. Throw that out there.
No,
Like what kind of like? Because she does have on a little bit of.
I mean, just a little bit.
I have
She
no
got that
makeup
gloss.
on. I got
Whatever.
the
You got on some lip gloss. Yes,
That's
you
some
do.
glow. See, then if it's not that, she's glowing for some reason.
It's just for y'all. I love
Okay.
it.
Okay.
Just for y'all. No, I actually have another business meeting in a couple of hours, so I'm gonna try really hard. Y'all hold me accountable. I've been going walking every day. I need to continue that, so I'm gonna try to squeeze in a walk before then.
All right, y'all.
Bye.
All right,
See y'all next
bye.
week.
All right.